Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to Investment and Portfolio Management class. Today we are going to start with chapter number 2 of the Frank Carelli and Keith C. Brown book. So let's start with our class. Before the class, you need to have your calculators and your register with you, so that if there is a need, you can calculate. And I'll try my level best to explain it in the best possible way. Let's start with the class. So the chapter number 2 is about the asset allocation decision. Uh, in this, there are before we start, there are certain questions that you should be able to answer at the end of this presentation and this chapter. The first thing is what is asset allocation? That's the first thing that you need to be able to answer. Uh, the second is what are the steps in the portfolio management process, because if you are making a portfolio, there is certain steps which are required, and what are the different steps that are required. So you should know them by the end of this chapter. Along with that, you should also be able to understand why is an investment policy statement important to the planning process for an investment. Along with that, what objectives and constraints should be detailed in a policy statement. Once you are making a policy statement, obviously there are certain objectives that you need to achieve. Similarly, there are certain constraints, so you need to know those constraints while making your policy statement. How and why do investment goal changes over a person's lifetime and circumstances? Obviously, as a young individual, you may have different goals to achieve, but at the later age, old age, obviously, your goals will be changed. So why they are changing? Why it is changing with your circumstances? Being very rich individual, probably your goals may be different. But if you don't have a lot of money, your goals may be different. So obviously that will change. Now, moving to the next slide. Okay, just like any other field of study that you choose, so you have to fulfill certain prerequisites. Those are known as the preliminaries, or you can say prerequisites in our courses. Just like if you want to take finance as your specialization, so obviously you have to pass your finance courses, your accounting courses. Only then you can choose finance your specialization. Uh, for medical, obviously you have to do pre-medical first, and then you can go to the medical field. Similar to that, if you want to do investment, obviously you have to fulfill certain prerequisites, and then you can start your investment. So the first of those prerequisites, are we can say preliminaries, is the insurance. uh, Dear students, investment is a risky business. Obviously, there are chances to earn very good returns or profits, but at the same time, there are chances that you may lose your wealth in a very short span of time. The recent example that we can see, that the corona has shown us, that world stock exchanges can go down by 20 to 25% or more than 30% in a time span of less than 10 to 15 days. So this can happen. So before you start your investment, you need to do certain prerequisites, and the foremost of that is you need to have insurance. Uh, Now there are different types of insurance that you can do. The first one is life insurance, which will give you benefits in case if you're not there, so your family will be supported. That is what you call as life insurance. Then there is health insurance, that sometime you may not be able to you may have diseases and problems, so you may not have sufficient capital to pay the fee of hospital, so there is a health insurance. Obviously, disabilities can arise, so there is disability insurance. Automobile insurance is very common, that if you have an expensive car, god forbid, there can be accident, there can be theft of cars, so you need to have automobile insurance. There are home insurance, and for businesses, there can be rental insurances and the liability insurances. So as an investor, if you want to start your investment career, you need to have these insurances first. Along with that, let's move to the next slide, and the next slide is you need to have certain cash reserves. You cannot put all of your money into investment, whatever you have. Obviously, investment will require some certain time to mature. So you cannot put everything into investment that you have. So you need to have certain cash reserves. Now, from money and banking subject, we know that there are different motives that we need to have cash. Why we are holding cash? So the first one is obviously the transactional motives. On daily basis we are carrying out small transactions. For that we need cash. Similarly, there are precautionary motives that you just want to have some cash in case of emergency. If you are in need of cash, so you need in emergency cases, so you need to hold cash. And then obviously there can be speculative motives, that some good opportunities can arise. So if you put everything into investment the day one, so then those good opportunities cannot be undertaken. So we need to hold some cash for speculative motives. Now, cash does not necessarily mean that it should all be in hot cash. It can be in liquid form of investments as well. You can invest in government securities, treasury bills, or you can put it into a saving account, a current account, which is almost equal to cash. uh, Experts are saying that you need to hold cash up to covering your 6 month of living expenditures. Now that's not a kind of standard, but it's just suggested by the experts, because you can lose your job, and once you lose your job, obviously you will not have your you may not get the next job the next day. So during that time you need to have certain cash which can go through from one job to the next job. And all these things are for what reason? For the reason of not selling your investment forcefully, because investment, it requires time. When you make investment, obviously it will take time to grow. But if you are not planning in advance, and then you are forced to sell your investment prematurely, you can lose value, or you can lose on the potential opportunity that you could have availed otherwise. So before starting your investment life, you need to have certain insurances, and you need to have certain cash reserves with you. Let's move to the next slide. Now, as an individual, when you start your investment life, so we call it as there are certain phases of your investment life. The first of the phases, we call it as the accumulation phase. Let me explain it before that. You can divide an individual life into two stages first: pre-investment life and an investment life. Pre-investment life can be like, as students, in the young age, you don't have anything to invest. So that is your pre-investment life. You can say in Pakistan it can be up to 20 years, or the age of 22, when you are a college student or university student. So you are actually being supported by your family, and you don't have your own income. So that is you. So obviously, when you don't have your income, you cannot have kind of investment as well. So that is your pre-investment life. But then your investment life starts, and the investment life cycle then comprises of 3 to 4 phases. The first phase, we call it as accumulation phase. It's the early to middle years of your working career. So once you graduate, and you complete your degrees, and you start your first job, so from there your investment life will start, and that is what you call as the accumulation phase. It will be further explained in the next slides, but just the word accumulation means that you are actually collecting different assets into your portfolio. The second one is then known as consolidation phase. Consolidation phase is generally from your mid career to almost your retirement age. That is what you call as the consolidation phase. uh, Once you make certain investments, now you want to consolidate them. In the accumulation phase, you may be risk taker, or you may be not very much concerned. You are just buying different assets to add to your portfolio, but then you become more concerned about your investments. Here generally your earnings are greater than your expenses, and you have certain savings, and then you can consolidate your position. The next phase is then known as spending phase, and along with that, it's you can say an overlapping phase with it is known as gifting phase. It begins after your retirement, anybody's retirement age. Once you'll get retired from your job, obviously your income will not be coming, the regular monthly income will not be coming. So now what you'll do is you'll be spending from whatever you have earned previously. And in the later stages, once you are old, then your gifting phase, charity and giving gifts to people, that will start. Let's move to the detail of this. So you need to look into this graph. The first one, it's just like the individual investor life cycle. The first one, it's just like the product life cycle. It's a kind of from introduction phase to going to a growth stage and then a maturity and a decline. It's just like it happens to an individual. So on the left hand side you have the net worth, on you can say on the y-axis, and the x-axis you have the age. So generally your investment life will start at the age of 20 or something around 22. It depends when you end your education. uh, as you move on, it's 25, 35, 45, 55, 65 and 75. That's your age. On the other side is your net worth. Net worth is your total assets minus total liabilities. So once you'll start your career, what will happen is that your assets will start increasing. So the first phase is the accumulation phase. Uh, in this time, your long-term goals. We will discuss that your goals later on, that how the goals are changing. So your long-term goals will be your retirement planning. So people start putting money into the retirement funds. If you're a government employee, obviously your pension deductions will be made by the employer. But then in private businesses, there are people are putting money for the retirement, and obviously you will, in the longer term, you will think about your children's education, their college, their school. These are your long-term plannings. In the shorter run, you are actually thinking about buying a car or buying a house for yourself. These are your short-term goals. When we move to the next phase, that is consolidation phase. Consolidation phase, as we discussed, that it is from the mid career, that's you can say from 40 to 45 years of age, to your retirement age, which in Pakistan you can say it's 60 years. So here again, your long-term planning will be regarding retirement. Still, you have time till retirement, and your shorter term goals will be vacation plannings, world tour, or maybe some summer vacations, and obviously your children education and their college and university will still be on your menu. Then comes the next phase, which is we call as the spending phase, which starts after your retirement. Here your long term planning will be estate planning. Estate planning, you can search on it. Estate planning mean that you are thinking about once you will be uh, unable to run your businesses and you will be incapacitated, mean uh, after your death, how your family will be run, how your assets will be distributed among your family members. These are which we call as estate planning. And in the shorter term, your goals are related to your lifestyle needs, uh, the life that you have, you are living. So now you have to maintain that. So for that you need to do something. So after retirement, obviously whatever you have accumulated up till now, from the previous 30, 40 years of your career, now you want to maintain your life. Your needs will change. You may not be thinking about increasing your wealth substantially now, but what you want is that you should be able to uh, maintain the lifestyle that you have achieved up till now. And here the same thing is what we call as the gifting phase, that is the parallel to it. uh, as we discussed that goals, life cycle investment goals of the individual, it can be classified into three categories. The first one we call it as near term and high priority goals. I mean, these are the goals which you want to achieve in the near term, in the near future, in the next, up to 5 years time, you can say 3 years time, that you want to achieve. And these are high priority goals, mean you cannot compromise on them. They are, you have to achieve them, just like your children education, let's say. If they are school going and they are supposed to go to the college, so they are near term, in the next 2 years or 3 years time they will enter into the college education or university education. And these are high priority goals because you cannot compromise on it. uh, the next type of goals we call it as long term and high priority goals. These are long term goals. They are not in the near term, and it may take like your retirement planning at the age of 35 or 40 years age. It's a high priority goal, clear that you need to do the retirement planning. But obviously it's a long term. If you are in the age of 35 or 40 years age, so it's still long term. In the next 20 or 25 years you are thinking about it. And then obviously the other goals, there's low priority goals. So if you want to say that you want to buy a branded mobile phone, or you want to buy a new branded car, these can be your goals, but these are low priority goals. You can compromise on them. These are the goals that you sometimes people want to achieve them, but they are low in priority. So if there is a need to compromise, you can compromise on them. But when it comes to the high priority goals, you cannot compromise on them. And obviously then you have to determine that near term goals and whether they are long term goals. So if you do the planning for the long term goals, they will not become contingent on you at the time when the time arises. So the goals can be divided into these three categories. Here come the portfolio management process. There are actually 4 steps in the portfolio management process. The first one of them is known as the policy statement. Before you start your investment life and you put your money, you need to have a policy statement. It's just like a kind of broader guidelines of your investment. What you want from your investment. That's the focus is investors' short-term and long-term needs, familiarity with the capital market history, and expectation about the future. So based on that, you will make your policy statement. We will discuss it in a more detail in the coming slides, but that's the first step. The second step is you need to examine the current and project financial, economic, political, and social conditions. Here the focus is on short-term and intermediate-term expectation condition to use in the constructing a specific portfolio. Now, the point that I want to explain here is that you set some objectives in the policy statement, and you want to achieve a particular, some rate of return. You have a certain, risk tolerance. Based on that, you need to examine the current and the projected economic and financial conditions. Then you will be looking for different alternatives in which you can invest so that you can achieve the goals that you have set in your policy statement. For that, the kind of analysis that we generally know, that SWOT analysis you will carry out. You will do the political, economic, social, and technological, analysis you will carry out, and you will identify different investment. Now, you should not limit yourself in only to your own country. You can think globally in terms of investment, because the global world offer more opportunities. So here you will look for the different alternatives in which you can invest. Then the next step is implement the plan by constructing the portfolio. So the objectives that you have set in your policy statement and the alternatives available to you in the market, you will compare them, and then based on your goals that you have set and the alternatives available to you, whichever alternative is best suitable for your policy statement, you will start selecting that investment and you will start making your portfolio. So here the focus is to meet the investor's needs at the minimum risk level. That's what I'm saying, that you identified the different alternatives available to you in step 2, while in the first step you identify your needs, your goals, in terms of, once I'll discuss in the next slide that the policy statement comprises of 3 factors, that is risk, return, and your constraints. So the best suitable alternatives available to you, you will start picking it, and you will make your portfolio, start making your portfolio. And the last step, obviously, in any management process is that you need to have a feedback loop. That you need to have monitoring. Once you make your portfolio, you need to monitor it on regular basis. You need to evaluate them after a certain time period, that is, let's say, on monthly basis or quarterly basis or an annual basis. You need to evaluate the performance of your portfolio. Now, how you will evaluate them? You will evaluate it with respect to your policy statement, whatever you have stated there, whether you have achieved those goals or not. And based on that, obviously, you will have a feedback. You will make certain, adjustment to make. Now, the adjustment can be in a policy statement. You were too ambitious or you were too conservative. You may have certain adjustment in your examining of the current and projected financial economic conditions, that things have changed, and that's why there are no more alternatives available, or the alternatives which were previously ignored, they are now being relevant. Similarly, it can be the implementation, the updation of the implementation plan, that the selection of the particular you can say investment alternatives were not rightly done, or it can be the monitoring process was not efficient. So remember that management is not a one-time activity that you will do it once and you will set aside and it will be in an automatic process that it has to be completed. You have to do it on regular basis. So the monitoring process is very important. Now, if let's say we take the current example that the coronavirus outbreak, and if an investor is good enough to forecast that it can affect the whole world, and that person can make adjustment of selling the stocks a bit earlier, especially of those companies which are energy related, because as the world will go into the recession, the demand for energy related the petroleum products and all these things will reduce, because there will be less production, and so as a result you can sell them, and then you can go to the some for example, if somebody can identify that a company which will be able to develop the medicine for the coronavirus, and if you can invest in those companies right now. Remember that it's a difficult task, and it's not an easy thing to forecast that which company will be able to develop that medicine. But if you can forecast somehow, obviously you will have very high returns. So the portfolio management process comprises of these four steps. The first one is that you need to have a policy statement. We will discuss it in more detail in the next slide. You need to examine the current and project financial, economic, and political conditions. Then you need to implement the plan that you have made by constructing your portfolio, and then obviously you need to have monitoring, evaluation, and feedback from that. Here come the detail of it, that what is a policy statement. So the policy statement, investment policy statement that we're talking about, it specifies investment goals and acceptable risk levels. Remember that when we are talking about in finance, we are always talking about risk and return. You cannot say that I want a higher return until and unless you accept a higher level of risk. So the policy statement identifies, or you can say it specifies, the investment goals in terms of acceptable risk level. And it should be reviewed periodically, because the risk level changes, and based on that the required rate of return can change. Just like these days, the current environment, the risk level is very high. So obviously you cannot say that you will have a very safe investment in equities are very risky these days. It guides all investment decisions, because as I told you, it's a kind of broader guidelines which will tell you what to do in the next steps. That's the first step, the planning process. So it will guide all your investment decisions that you will make in the future regarding specific securities to purchase, or specific sectors to choose, or specific regions or countries in which you are going to invest. So it's a kind of the guidelines for your investment decision making. The second one is, as we discussed, the study the current financial and economic condition and forecast the future trends based on the past and the current data. It determine the strategies to meet the goals. So the first you provide the guidelines, and then here you will formulate the strategies to meet the goals that you have set in your policy statement. It requires monitoring and updating as well. Obviously, things will not be the same. So you need to, the economic conditions can change, the financial conditions can change, and that can change your forecast about the future. So obviously, updating of it will be required on regular basis. The next step is construct the portfolio, and it means that allocate available funds to minimize the investor's risk and meet investment goals. So whatever amount that you want to put into investment, so you have to allocate that fund to different alternatives that you identify in the second step, which will minimize the investor's risk, and at the same time want to achieve the will make you enable to achieve the investment goals that you have set in your policy statement. Then comes the portfolio management process last step, that is monitoring, evaluation, and feedback. So during this, what we'll do is monitor the investor's needs and market condition. If you're a portfolio manager, you need to understand that the investor needs can change, and similarly the market conditions can change. The next is that you need to evaluate the performance, portfolio performance, after 6 months or after 1 year. You need to evaluate the performance of the portfolio that you have put, and you know how you will compare it. You will compare it to the policy statement, what you have stated there, what you want to achieve, and what you actually achieved. So against that, you will evaluate the performance, and based on that, what you will do is you will revise your policy statement as and if needed. Now, remember that there may be a requirement to change your policy statement. You may set very low goals, which you achieved. Obviously, that is not good, and you may have set very ambitious goal which could not be achieved in the current circumstances. So there may be a need to change your policy statement as well, or it may enable you to modify the investment strategy accordingly, as in the second step of your portfolio management process. And lastly, obviously, as we discuss, that the specific selection of the portfolio or the asset can be modified. Now we move to the next slide, and the need for a policy statement. You can say the importance of investment policy statement, or why an investor should have an investment policy statement. So the first point is the investment policy statement helps investor understand their own needs and objectives and investment constraints. Before we go that to the detail of that why the investment policy statement is important for others, it is important for the investor himself or herself, that it should be clear to the investor that what goals, objectives or constraints you have. So it should be clear to you that what you want to achieve from your investment. Similarly, the second importance is that it sets standards for evaluating the portfolio performance, because at the end we need to evaluate the performance of the portfolio, and you can similarly say the performance of the portfolio manager. So how you can compare it? We can compare it by having a policy statement in which we have set that what we want to achieve from our investment. So it can be used as a yardstick against which the performance can be measured. What we have stated in the policy statement, what we want to achieve, and what we actually achieved, so there is a comparison possible. If we have not set any goals in the policy statement that we want to achieve, so then any performance can be considered as a good or a bad performance, because there is nothing against which we can compare the performance of the portfolio. The next one is it reduces the possibility of inappropriate behavior on the part of portfolio manager. Now remember, in the policy statement you will tell, as we discussed, it's a broader guidelines to guide the investment decisions. So you are actually providing a roadmap to the portfolio manager that what we are actually expecting from you. So if there is a policy statement, you can refer to that whatever decision you have made, it is in accordance with the policy statement, or it is not in accordance with the policy statement. Remember that sometime you may earn your portfolio manager may earn a higher return for you, but by taking too much risk, which then can be said that it is an inappropriate behavior by the portfolio manager. So it can be set as a standard against which the performance can be measured, so the portfolio managers can adjust his or her behavior to that policy statement that we have given that person. And lastly, that if you have a policy statement, it makes the portfolio transition process easy. Remember that for a large number of people, they are not managing their own portfolios. Their portfolios are actually being managed by a portfolio manager. We call them as wealth consultants. So those individuals, they are not supposed to stay there forever. So if they move, now sometimes they are employees of pension fund or a mutual fund who are actually looking after your portfolio. So if they are being promoted to another level, and they are leaving, and someone else is taking the portfolio manager position, so how that person will understand that how to run your or manage your portfolio? So if there is a policy statement, that policy statement can be used, and the person can manage your portfolio. Similarly, the person can leave the job and move to another organization, and someone else is taking over the position. So that person will read the policy statement and will understand how to manage this portfolio. And God forbid, if somebody dies, is no more there. So now again someone else is taking over the position. So in that situation, the transition process is easy. By just reading the policy statement, the new person, the new portfolio manager will be able to understand how to run or how to manage your portfolio. So there are four important points I just want to reiterate. The first one is that policy statement is important for the investor himself or herself to understand what are his or her objectives in terms of risk and return, and what are his or her constraints. We will discuss what are constraints in detail in the coming slides. The second one, that this policy statement can be used as a yardstick against which the performance of the portfolio manager can be measured. The next one is that it can reduce the inappropriate behavior of the portfolio manager. You can make a person responsible if you have set certain standards against which the performance will be measured. And lastly, that it makes the portfolio management transition process easy, that if one portfolio manager is leaving and somebody else is taking over the position, so that person can read the policy statement and will be able to manage it without wasting too much time. Now let's come to the investment objectives. The first thing you need to understand is that you need to have your risk tolerance level. Risk tolerance is in terms of how much losses you are able to bear. Remember, we discussed in the very first slide that you are not supposed to put everything into investment, because if situation arises that you are in need of capital, and then you will be forced to sell your investment. So based on your risk tolerance level, you need to have certain insurance and cash reserves. Then it increases your risk tolerance level. You can wait for your investment to mature. So you need to understand that how much losses you can bear without you actually disturbing your life or the life of your loved ones, your family. The second point that you need to understand is that these the objectives in terms of return that you want to achieve, there should be an absolute or relative percentages return. Mean, for example, I can say that I want a return of 10% from my investment, or I want a return of 14% from my investment. The relative percentage can be that I want to earn a return equal to the market, or I want to earn a return equal to the treasury bills plus 5%. This is what I want. So it's a kind of relative. Now, if the treasury bill is earning 12%, what I am asking is that 12 plus 5 mean I want 17% return. On the other hand, if the treasury bill return drop down to, let's say, 7%, then I only need 12%. Or it can be in relative term to the market, that let's say if the stock exchange index is earning 12%, I want equal to that, or 2% more than that, so then I need 14%. That is what you call as absolute or relative percentage return. Now the journal goals can be divided into four categories. The first one we call it as capital preservation. That is, the primary focus in this one is that you want to preserve the real value of your investment. So you want a return which is sufficient to offset the effects of inflation. A return which will offset it will keep your purchasing power constant, and probably a 1 or 2% more than that will be sufficient. The second one is what we call as capital appreciation, where your primary focus is to increase the real value of your investment in terms of capital gains. So you want to appreciate your value. You are not just satisfied with the offsetting the effects of inflation. Rather, you want to earn a return which is much higher than the inflation, so that your real purchasing power will increase. The next one is what we call it as current income. In current income, the objective is that your investment should generate sufficient current income, regular income, a stream of regular income, so that you can meet your day-to-day requirements. Generally, this kind of objective is set by very old age people, people of 65, 70 or 75-year-old. What they are concerned about, that their investment should generate a regular income so that they can run their kitchen. They may not be concerned about increasing the purchasing power of their investment, or they want to increase the real value of their investment. They are more concerned about that a regular stream of cash flow should be coming. And that's why, most of these old age people, they are investing in the national saving, which is giving regular income to these people. And the last one obviously is known as total return, which is a combination of capital appreciation and current income. The total return strategy, that you want certain increase in your appreciation in your investment or your portfolio value, but at the same time you want to generate certain income, current income from your investment. So if your needs are higher, that regular income will be used to meet those needs along with your regular income coming from your salary. But obviously, if you don't have any needs, so then what you will do is that income that you have generated will be reinvested, so that along with the capital gain, you are getting some regular income. So there may be it's a combination of the capital appreciation and the current income objectives. Let's move to the next one, and these are actually the details. The capital preservation is to minimize risk of real loss. It means that to earn a rate of return that should offset the impact of inflation. The capital appreciation, the focus is growth of the portfolio in real terms to meet future needs. The current income, here the focus is in generating income rather than capital gains, as I discussed, that that you want to generate regular income from it instead of increasing the value of your portfolio. And total return is increase portfolio value by capital gains and by reinvesting the current income that you generate. It maintains a moderate risk level. Capital gains are risky. The value can increase to a higher level, and then once the crisis will arise, the value will drop down significantly. So in this case, the total return strategy, obviously you have generated certain amount of income in the form of cash, so that reduces the risk level. Let's move to the next slide, and the next slide is investment constraint that you were talking about. Remember, your policy statement will talk about the risk, return, and constraints. Risk in terms of as we discussed in chapter number 1, that how we can calculate risk level, and based on the individual risk tolerance level, risk can vary for individual, that how much risk they can bear. Return, how we can calculate the rate of return and yields, we discussed that in chapter number 1 as well. But the next important point is constraints. Now constraint, remember, first we need to understand what is constraint. Constraint mean that, for example, a particular investment is otherwise acceptable to you in terms of risk and return, but due to certain factor you cannot undertake it. So that particular factor which actually prohibits you from undertaking that investment is known as a constraint. Now the first type of constraint which can come to an individual is liquidity. Liquidity needs are liquidity constraint. There are certain investments that we all know that it can generate good returns, and they are not that much risky. The only problem with such investments that they are not liquid in nature. Liquidity means that when the need arises, the investment should be converted to cash easily, quickly, and at a fair market value. Remember these three factors: easily, quickly, and at a fair market value. When you say it's easily conversion to cash is liquidity, we actually ignore the fair market value, because if you want to sell even a plot, or you can say a expensive item, but if you want to sell it at a substantially lower price, people will buy it. Liquidity means that you can convert it to the cash at a fair market value, quickly at a fair market value. So there are certain investments which may give you good returns. They are not very risky, but they are illiquid in nature. Real estate is one of the examples in Pakistan. We all know that in the long run, the prices of real estate increases, and they increases at a higher rate. So they generally give you good returns. But the only problem with that is that they are illiquid in nature. If there is a need arises and you want to sell it, on a short notice, you will lose a lot of value, because you may not get a good buyer. So the need to convert investment into cash in short time period vary between investors depending upon age, employment, tax status, etc. Remember that if you are a 25 or 30-year-old individual, your liquidity needs may not be very high, because you can wait for your investment for the next 10, 15 years. but at the age of 65 or 70, your liquidity needs are very high. So it depends. Similarly, it depends on the employment. If you are a, for example, if you are a government employee, a regular employee, uh, you probably know that you will get a regular income on monthly basis. But on the other hand, if you're a, you're not a government servant or you're not a regular employee, so then your employment can be terminated at any point of time, and in that situation, your liquidity needs should be high because you will then wait for the next job searching, and that's why during that process you need to have sufficient cash to carry you through to the next job. And obviously tax status, that let's say if you are a very rich individual, your tax liabilities are very high, so you cannot put your investment into such areas where they are taxed at a higher rate, because you need to have pay taxes. So if you put everything into illiquid investment, so from where you will pay your taxes. So these are the factors which affect your needs. The next constraint is time horizon. Time horizon is it's a very simple phenomena. Time horizon is that for how much time you can commit your capital. Uh, Now it's just like fruits. If you want to wait for it, and then you want to harvest them, obviously you will get good returns. But if you sell them prematurely, you will not get sufficient value for your investment. So time horizon is a constraint. Sometimes there are investments which are very good, but they required long-term capital commitment. Now, so in terms of risk and return, it may be acceptable to you, but in terms of time horizon, because it takes longer time to mature and it requires longer time capital commitment, which you cannot spare. So that means that it's a constraint, and due to that, you are unable to undertake that kind of investment. It is again influences the liquidity needs and the risk tolerance of the individual, because if you have long horizon, you can wait for longer term, you can tolerate more risk, you can undertake risky businesses as well, investments as well. But you cannot spare your capital for a very long time, then you cannot take risk with your capital. Just like if you cannot, these days, if people have invested their capital in equities and they were short term oriented, now the equities has dropped down by a significant percentages. So due to the time horizon, if they wait, and inshallah things will recover again, and prices will increase and the economies will flourish again, but it may take another 4 to 5 years, maybe. So if you cannot spare your capital for a very longer time period, you may experience losses. Therefore time horizon is a constraint for those investment which are illiquid in nature. The next one is, we call it as tax concern or tax constraints. Remember that when we invest, the return that we earn is in two forms. One is in terms of capital gains or capital losses, and the other is in the form of you can say current income. In stocks, we call them as dividend income. In bonds, we call them as coupon payments or coupon income. Now, capital gains and current incomes, they are taxed differently. So if you are someone who is in a very high tax bracket, and a particular investment which is acceptable to you in terms of you can say in terms of return, that is and its risk level, but since it is taxable, and once you will the government will charge taxes on it, the after tax rate of return that you will get is less. So let me explain it in in the slide form. First we should go to it, and then in the next slide I have made certain examples through which I can make you explain that how tax can be a constraint for you. The first point is capital gains or losses, they are taxed differently from the current income in the form of coupon payment or dividend income. There can be unrealized capital gains. We call it as paper gains, mean that share that you have purchased at a price of, let's say, 40 rupees, and now its price has increased to 70 rupees, so there is actually a 30 rupees capital gain. But if you still you are holding the share, so this capital gain is unrealized capital gain. That is the increase in the share price from 40 to 70. but you have not yet sold out the share. Therefore, it's a unrealized capital gain, and unrealized capital gains are not taxed in Pakistan. On the other hand, if I sell the share at 70, so then the 30 rupees capital gain is a realized gain. Clear? So when I'll sell the stock at 70, so then it will become a realized capital gain. And there is a capital gain tax. Capital gain tax, obviously the capital gain tax is less than the income tax. Clear? So there is a trade-off between taxes and diversification. Sometimes, for example, there are, you purchase the stocks of your own company, where you are working. We call it as, you get those stocks as a result of employee stock option plans. Mean the employer offer you the stocks, and those were like, at that time you were given at a price of 10 rupees, or even in some time it's a kind of bonus. And the company generally asks the employees to hold the stocks for like at least 3 to 5 years. Now you are having a large number of your own company stock, and now the 5 years time has passed. You purchase the stocks at 10 rupees, now they are worth 80 rupees, for example. Now the point is, if you want to sell these stocks now, there will be a realized capital gain of 70 rupees, and then you have to pay taxes. Now diversification will tell you that you should sell these stocks and you should purchase some other company's stocks so that your portfolio become diversified. But the problem is that if you are selling these stocks, then the 70 rupees capital gains will be realized, and then you have to pay the capital gain tax on these 70 rupees. So the consequences is that tax consequences of selling the company stock for diversification purpose, it's a kind of dilemma for you, whether you should sell the stocks and pay the capital gain tax and then diversify your portfolio, or the other hand is that you keep on holding the stocks of your own company. You will avoid the capital gain taxes, but then obviously your portfolio will not be diversified. Here come that I was talking about, that how the tax constraints are working. So the interest on municipal bonds, they are tax free, they are tax exempted. Federal income tax is exempted, and from the US perspective, the state taxes are exempted. Similarly, the interest on the federal securities are exempted from state income tax, and the contribution to the IRA, this is for an American perspective, may qualify as deductible from taxable income. This regarding USA, so it's not related to us. But let's talk about what I was talking about, that how tax can play a role. And here come that the after tax rate of return. So whenever you are investing somewhere, your focus should be based on the after tax rate of return that you are getting. How the marginal tax rate can affect the investment choices. So here is the example. The after tax rate of return is equal to the nominal rate of return and into 1 minus marginal tax rate of the individual. And the example that I have just quoted, and I told you that you need to have your calculators with you. So let's say the nominal rate of return is 12% and your marginal tax rate is 20%. So someone who is in a 20% tax bracket is earning a 12% return on a particular investment. The person will actually get how much return? 9.6%. How? Because the 12% into 1 minus your tax rate, and that is 20%. So 1 minus 0.2 is equal to 12 into 0.8, because 1 minus 0.2 is equal to 0.8. So 0.8 into 12 is equal to 9.6%. So your after tax rate of return is 9.6%. On the other hand, let's say another investment which is offering you actually 10%, but that is municipal bond. And remember that municipal bond is tax free. So if you get that 10%, you are in a 20% tax bracket, but municipal bond is tax free. So what will be your after tax rate of return? 10%. Now remember, you will forgo about this 12% return. Why? Because if you get the 12% return, but if you will pay 20% tax on the income that you generate, you will end up with a 9.6% return. On the other hand, the municipal bond which is offering you a 10% return, since it is tax exempted, your return will be 10%. But let's say someone who is in only a 5% tax bracket, so you have to solve this with a 5% marginal tax rate. So if someone is with a 5% marginal tax rate, then his or her after tax rate of return on this 12% bond will be 12% into 1 minus 0.05, 1 minus 0.05, and so that will be equal to 12 into 0.95. Now I'm going to solve it here. That will be 12 into 0.95, and the answer is 11.4, 11.4%. Now for that person this will be a good investment, because that person tax rate, marginal tax rate is only 5%. So for him or her, the after tax rate of return on this particular investment will be 11.4%, while the municipal bond will offer the person a return of 10%. So someone who is in a 20% tax bracket, this 12% is not a good investment alternative. But someone who is in a 5% tax bracket, this 12% is a good investment alternative, because his or her after tax rate of return will be 11.4%, while for the municipal bond the return is only 10%. But for a 20% individual, a 20% marginal tax rate, the 12% after tax rate of return is 9.6%, while the municipal bond of 10% will be 10% because it is tax exempted. So that's how tax can be a constraint for someone who is in a higher tax bracket. Remember that the individual tax rates can go to 30% or even more beyond 30%. So someone who is in a 25% tax bracket or a 30% tax bracket or 29% tax bracket, the after tax rate of return will be much lower than 9.6%. But the municipal bond will offer a 10% return, which is tax exempted. Now here you need to solve, and that is your assignment, that the equivalent tax yield. So how you'll do it, that in this case, that let's say the municipal bond was 10%, 1 minus your tax rate, and you have to solve it, that what will be the equivalent tax yield that you will get. Here come the example. Here is the example. It talks about that if you invest $1,000 in a tax exempted or tax deferred investment for 30 years at a rate of 8%. So your future value will be equal to how much? It is 10,062.66 rupees. How you get it? Simple. You put the future value of formula. Compound interest future value formula. That your present value is $1,000. Your time n is 30 years, and your interest rate is 8%. So you simply put 1,000 into 1 plus your interest rate, and the interest rate is 8%, and so that is 1 plus 0.08 bracket close raised to power 30. So it means 1,000 into 1.08 raised to power 30. You click equal and you will get 10,062.66. It means that a $1,000 invested today for 30 years at a rate of 8% interest, and if it is tax exempted, it means you will get 8%. So after 30 years it will increase to $10,062.66. On the other hand, if it is not tax exempted and you are in a 28%, as the example is given, that you are in a 28% tax bracket, so then your after tax rate of return will be 5.76. Now how you get the 5.76 return? That is, the after tax rate of return is equal to 8% into 1 minus your marginal tax rate. 1 minus your marginal tax rate. Now you need to take your calculator and determine, that is 8% into, I start bracket 1 minus 0.28, that is equal to 5.76. Now obviously the camera will show it differently, but it's 5.76%. So now your after tax rate of return is 5.76. So if you determine the future value of this $1,000 with a 5.76 rate of return, annual rate of return, your future value will be equal to how much? $5,365.91. And that is the difference. That if you are tax exempted, your value will be 10,062.66. And if you are not tax exempted, your value will be 5,362, almost half of the value of if you are tax exempted. And that's how tax can be a concern for you. It can be a constraint for you. If you are tax exempted, your value will increase at a higher rate. If you are not tax exempted, your value will increase at a lower rate. That's why rich people, those who are in a high tax bracket, they generally prefer municipal bonds because their municipal bond income is tax exempted, while the corporate bonds can offer higher return, but because of the tax concern, they may not be chosen by these investors who are in a high tax bracket. The next constraint is legal and regulatory factors. These can play as a constraint for choosing an investment. The first one of that is limitation or penalties on withdrawal. There are certain investments which you want to, if you want to withdraw earlier, and there will be certain penalties charged, and banks generally, when you put your money into term deposit and you want to withdraw it before that, so obviously you have to pay penalty on that. Or it can restrict your withdrawal. Similarly, some insurance companies, they don't allow you to withdraw your money before 3 years or 5 years time period. Then obviously there are fiduciary responsibilities. Sometime you have some ethical or sometimes some legal requirement. Let's say you're a person from the board of director of a company, and you also have the stocks of that company, or someone who is interested in buying and selling the stock of that company who is known to you. But then your fiduciary responsibility is that you are not going to give any information to that person. So that limits you, that you cannot legally do that, ethically you can't do that. Similarly, investment laws prohibit insider trading. As I told you, that if you are on the board of directors, you cannot buy or sell the stock of that company based on the information of which is not public. So that is what you call as insider trading. And similarly, restriction on the commercial banks, that they are not allowed to invest in certain areas. So they are known as legal or regulatory factors or constraints. There can be some unique needs and preferences of individuals. Just like in Pakistan, we can simply say in a society, we generally say that I want a 8% or 10% return, but I don't want to earn it from interest bearing securities. So that is a kind of unique need or unique preferences of the individual. Internationally, personal preferences such as socially conscious investment. I'm not going to buy the stock of a company which is not ISO 14000 certified, or a company which is not paying attention to the child labor or women rights or these kind of things. So these are known as unique or personal needs or preferences of the individual. Time constraint, a lack of expertise for managing the portfolio may require professional management. Obviously, just like it can be a person, individual or unique constraints, that I cannot manage my own portfolio, so I'm asking someone else to manage the portfolio for me. And that's why I'll tell that individual that you're not going to buy such stocks for me based on my unique preferences or my personal preferences. Some of the companies, individuals who don't want to buy the stocks of tobacco companies, for example, they think that it is not environmental friendly, or it's not good for the human health, so therefore we are not going to buy the stocks of such companies. In that case, other than that, in terms of risk and return, the investment can be good for you, but based on your personal preferences, you are not going to buy the stock of such companies. Large investment in employees stock may require consideration of the diversification needs. As I discussed earlier, that if you are buying the stocks of your own company, where you are employed, so obviously there will be a need to diversify. But as we discussed earlier, that if you sell the stocks of your own company at a higher price, you will pay capital gain tax. Then you can diversify. So there is a trade-off between the two. You can diversify your portfolio by selling the stocks of your employer and invest in other companies, but then you have to pay the capital gain tax on that. There can be institutional investor needs. Institutional investors, they can have certain limitation, that we are not going to buy the stocks of companies which are, like, you can say, not qualifying into certain category. A company where the the equity base is less than a particular amount. So institutional investors can say. Another very important example can be like, we are not going to buy the stocks of or invest in any country which is in the gray list or black list of, like, FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. Now that's a kind of constraint, that they are not going to buy the stocks. So it will, for example, if you are in that gray list, and an international mutual fund, or you can say investment institution, is saying that we are not going to buy the stocks of any company or any country which is in the gray list. So obviously, they'll not buy Pakistani stocks. So these are unique or personal constraints. Constructing the policy statement, it's just like a recap. You need to understand about the objectives in terms of risk and return, and constraints. And constraints can be liquidity, time, tax, legal, or regulatory constraints, and unique needs and preferences. Developing a plan depends on understanding the relationship between risk and return, and the importance of diversification. So there's a relationship between risk and return. If you are not ready to take higher risk, you will not be able to earn higher return. And obviously there is an importance of diversification, that if you are going to take risk, then you can diversify, and diversification can provide you that reduction in risk level. The importance of asset allocation. An investment strategy is based on 4 decisions. And what are those 4 decisions? Number 1, what asset classes to consider for investment, where we are going to invest, whether we invest in equities, whether we invest in bonds, whether we invest in some real assets. That is the first thing. The second thing is what normal or policy weights to assign to each eligible class. If we say that we are going to invest in bonds, we are invest in stocks or equities, we are investing in some real assets. So then how much of our total, let's say we have an investment, so out of 100%, how much we should invest in each category or each class. And then based on that, determine the allowable allocation ranges based on the policy weights. We identify the weights, that these are the from it's from 20 to 30% we will invest in equities, from 30 to 40% we will invest in, like, bonds, and then we will keep some in government securities. So based on that, how much amount we should allocate to each category. And last is then obviously selecting the specific securities to purchase for the portfolio. So let's say we say equities, but then equities, there can be automobile sector, there can be fertilizer sector in Pakistan, there can be banks, there can be energy sector, and then within those, let's say cement sector, construction sector. So then within that, which specific companies stocks we are going to purchase? OGDCL, for example, we are going to purchase PSO stock, we are going to purchase DG Khan cement or Lucky cement. So these are the four points clear regarding to asset allocation. Summary. Policy statement determines the types of asset to include in the portfolio. Asset allocation determines portfolio return more than the stock selection, because in the asset allocation we determine that which stocks we are going to buy, the broader category, not the specific company. So that is more important than the actual selection of a particular company, because if you are going to say we are going to invest in equities, we are going to invest in bonds, these decisions are more important. How much you are investing in equities, how much you are investing in the bonds, how much you are investing in the real assets, these will determine it. Over a long time period, sizable allocation to equities will improve results. Obviously, equities, they are more risky, but they are earning higher return as well. Not in these days, the corona, it has lost a large amount of value, but generally over a longer period of time, the average rate of return on equities is much higher than the average rate of returns on bonds or any other kind of investment. So obviously, it can improve your results if you put your money into equities. A risk of a strategy depends on the investor's goals and time horizon. Obviously, individual, what kind of goals they want to achieve and what is the time horizon. If most of the investment, they will earn good returns in the longer run, but that longer run does not mean that it will be 2 years or 3 years. Sometimes it can take even 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So if you can wait for that time period, obviously you will earn higher rate of return. There are, the cultural differences in the asset allocation. Social, political, and tax environment influence the asset allocation decisions. Just like, it's just for an example, that equity allocation of the US pension funds average 58%, while in the UK, equities makes up 78% of the assets. While in Germany, equity allocation average only 8%. In Japan, equities are 37% of the asset. Now these are the differences. Now somebody may, like you, will come out with the findings that how much in Pakistan equity makes the total assets investment. Obviously, it has dropped down significantly recently, but due to the corona, because the value of overall stock exchange has dropped down significantly, but we can look to it. Thank you so much. This brings us to the end of chapter 2 presentation. Hope to see you with chapter 3 presentation soon. Thank you so much.